Very pleased today to be able to speak to Tom McMahon, the Chief Executive Officer of the Singapore Mercantile Exchange, a few days before you go live.
Yes, absolutely.
Are you excited?
Very much so. Very much so. Yeah, it's one of those times that you only get to do this a couple of times in your life, maybe only once. I've been sort of lucky. I've got to do it a couple of times over my career, but for Singapore and for us, yeah, it's a very exciting time.
So, what are the nervous points that it's at the tip of your fingernails? Like, what are the things that need to be in place for day one of trading?
Just that the lights are going to be on and everything's going to be plugged in. I mean, literally, when as you come to an end of sort of one of those narrowing points of a project before you break out to the next level, and that's where we are. I mean, the goal has been to get to launch, and then there's the day after. So we're on the edge of all of the pieces. I mean, I was talking the other day to a group of people, and I said it's like a puzzle. And you remember when you got your first puzzle, it was like a 10-piece puzzle. And then maybe you really got ambitious as an adult. You got a 1,000-piece puzzle. Well, we've got about a 100,000-piece puzzle. And we're getting those last pieces, and you're looking for that last piece to fit into that last little slot. So,
Singapore as a location for a commodities exchange.
Yeah.
Are we late, or are we right on time, or are we ahead of the curve in terms of the need for a commodities exchange in a city like Singapore? Because when you think about it, commodities exchanges have worked well in larger countries where there is a domestic commodities industry in that sense.
I'd say in 2010 we're right on time. And it's been an interesting shift recently. I think if you looked at this 5 years ago, maybe there wasn't as much of a demand, but there definitely was a regional demand, small, maybe siloed individual products, and I think that they were successful. But today, literally the last 3 to 5 years, just the dramatic shift of the economies and demand, shipping, storage. Asia has caught up to the demand for having a broad-based exchange.
And the products that you've selected as your first set of products to be traded, does that match or mirror some realities on the ground, like the kind of businesses that already exist in Singapore, for example?
I think ideally, if we could have launched the absolute perfect product mix, we probably would have launched 25 products at once, and it's sort of an untenable position. But the first set of products are the benchmarks, and they're known relative to Asia. They're familiar spaces, but the core base for those products are traded elsewhere. But the demand is here, and the hedge risk is here, and the legacy of using those products in Asia is familiar territory. It's just a building block for us to take it and expand it to the next level of the demand products.
In starting the commodities exchange in Singapore, what from the ground are you taking? How much onshore trading there already is that you're trying to make online? How much OTC trading already takes place? What are you deriving your value from or picking up from into the exchange?
Well, I think if you could break them down into the market sectors of which we want to address. We want to address energies, agriculturals, metals, currencies, indices. That market share is all here, whether they're the domestic or the pure Asian industries or the multinationals. They've brought their risk and trading platforms and their investment community for commodities and derivatives. They're based in Singapore. They're not necessarily in Hong Kong, not necessarily in Tokyo or Sydney. They're here, so the organics of that industry exist. And you can almost step through it. I know Olam reported yesterday very successfully in the pure commodity space, looking at cotton and sugar and cocoa. But this is their base of operation, and they're not just the only one within that field.
So would you say that the corporates that already exist here in the commodity space are your first natural customers?
Absolutely, and not just legacy firms. Firms such as Credit Suisse, who just in the recent weeks have spoken about their movement of commodity and derivatives hedging operations specifically to Singapore to face Asia. So Credit Suisse is not a new name in Singapore, but these operations are new in Singapore, so it's very timely.
Right. The corporates and the financial institutions, give us a sense of that value chain in the corporates that trade commodities, companies like Olam, for example, and what was missing, and how the existence of of an SMX will change the nature of their business.
I happened to be at a conference last week with the chairman, with Sonny, and he spoke about what's unhedgeable in Asia. And he says about 55% of his entire risk chain cannot be hedged on an exchange in Asia. There's core products such as cotton, but there's no real hedge mechanism in an open exchange out here for him. Cocoa is really hedged up against New York and London, where the profile and the risk are in this part of the world. And those are obvious ones, but there's a multitude of products beyond that. And one specifically he mentioned was dairy. You can't hedge it in this part of the world. So if all I did was sit down and had an organic conversation with him, I could probably find 5 or 6 products that could be brought to an exchange.
Right, but you wouldn't hedge dairy in Singapore.
Not necessarily, but it doesn't mean that it doesn't have a relevance to the industries that have a hedge need or a risk mitigation need, that their corporate operations or their trading operations are based here, or their shipping and storage operations are based here. The pricing of a product is not necessarily always at the point of origin, and I think.
And tell us a little bit about your conversations with financial institutions. What needs to be hedged? What's happening today without a commodities exchange?
Well, what's happening is again, I think it's shifting demand and shifting risk on a number of levels. Just pure demand and supply economics for Asia, where it wasn't necessarily here 10 years ago, but also trade finance and the risk on trade finance. I mean, the core industries, whether you're going to finance a refinery or a storage operation for energy, or you're in the shipbuilding industry, or you're a rice grower, or you're going to finance farms, that's all a risk portfolio up against commodities, and there's opportunities in Asia for the growth end of that.
Right, but the financial institutions that trade them on OTC at the moment, do they see you as a threat? Is there a beholden market that they hold captive in?
Well, I think conceptually, if you went back just 6 years ago, the concept of a cleared OTC on an exchange was foreign, and it took a lot to convince people. Yet today, that's an industry standard. They were totally opposed to the concept of taking an OTC trade and putting it on an exchange. Today, no one can live without it, basically. Fundamentally, that can be explored and transpired through. So whether it becomes a pure transaction as opposed to a posted cleared functionality, there's opportunity on both sides for the exchange.
But what has to happen in terms of the connectivity between the exchange and the players, and what's the conversation that's taking place right now, and how are the banks playing ball with you at the moment?
Well, the banks are cooperative in that. I think that they're changing their internals. Obviously, it's a very profit-driven. The opaqueness of markets can be immensely profitable, but I think the realities of risk, of performance on bilaterals, or just the demands of regulatory infrastructures that are being put in place, not so much necessarily in Singapore at the moment, but if you look at the fin regs that are going to go through the US, EU, and UK, that'll impact, and the demand for this to come to an exchange or regulated structures is just part of one of the reasons why they want to move towards us.
Right, and what role does the regulator play in herding the opportunities your way, or standing in your way?
They don't stand in our way. That's very clear. They've been very, very open and supportive. But regulators are neutral. Whether they're going to herd business my way or not is. But I think Singapore is unique, is the integral of all the different agencies, how they work together within Singapore. So
the Singapore regulator is somewhat different in that
yes.
They also try to facilitate markets, and
yes.
they try to build the complexity.
I agree.
They would have arranged for you to start this, or rather they would have encouraged
absolutely
the setting up of this.
There's no doubt that they value the economics of this proposition before they ever let us go forward with it. Yeah, that's for sure. And that is the uniqueness of MAS and
right.
and the